Okay. I just saw her head last night, so.
We are live on YouTube.
That is great. You heard from Judy. Okay, great. So we have quorum. We are live to the world. We're going to be organized. So it's 2:31. I will call this committee of the whole meeting to order. Start in a good way by acknowledging with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. These people have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding the Quellahem, Bowen Island. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, March 21st, 2023. Both everybody here as well as folks that are joining us online or by our live stream. I'm Andrew Leonard, the Mayor of Bowen Island Municipality and Chair of this meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and when members of the public speak during the public comment or Q&A section of the meeting, your presence and voice will be included in our permanent recording, which will be available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca as well as our YouTube channel. For folks that are watching online or here in the room, I will note that our agenda package for this committee of the whole meeting is available on our website at bowenislandmunicipality.ca. With all that said, I will look for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
So moved by Councillor Morse, seconded by Councillor Wake. Any objections? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Moving on to item 3, public comments. I'll look to our corporate officer to see if we have any public comments today.
Yes, we have one on Zoom. Let's go ahead and coordinate.
Okay. Mr. Cormier, you can unmute yourself. You have 3 minutes for public comments, and whenever you're free, we can hear you and you are live.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council. I won't take much time today. I know you've already received a letter from me as well as several other letters from our business community. I just want to start by saying I was a bit shocked when I first saw this committee of the whole meeting scheduled with the intent to debate the ratio for tax businesses. That said, I'm actually glad the council is looking to address this. This discussion highlights the importance of recognizing how Bowen Island sometimes differs from other municipalities within our region, and why on some issues it's important to maintain that difference. Previous councils have always upheld the 1-to-1 ratio, assumedly because they recognized how unbalanced any alternate formula would be. I'm sure I don't need to list for you the challenges that small businesses have endured in recent years. Ours is a small and fragile local economy, and businesses simply can't take much more pressure. The staff report has detailed very well the fact that a change like this is of no benefit to municipal coffers. It serves only to provide a nominal reduction of residential taxation while heaping an enormously unbalanced and unfair amount onto businesses in the Cove. In fact, it seems uniquely targeted at a small portion of the actual businesses on the island, those that are traditionally the most vulnerable to failure due to their higher overhead and lower margins, which are the visible brick and mortar retail and hospitality businesses in the Cove. It's very difficult for business owners on Bowen to understand the rationale that we require more municipal services and should therefore pay more in taxes. When we pay for all our own garbage disposal, we're required to shovel snow from public sidewalks, we pay for landscaping to beautify our storefronts, and we donate our time and money into communities, events, and fundraisers. I understand the need for council to address this item as part of its budgeting process, but I ask you to consider how this committee of the whole discussion has triggered the business community into a state of panic. And I think I can speak with confidence on behalf of the entire business community of Bowen Island when I say that we fully support the recommendation by staff to maintain the current 1-to-1 tax ratio. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Are there any other public comments this afternoon? Seeing none, we will move on to item 4.1, the property tax distribution ratio, with our CFO for a report to council.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. Through the chair, I would like to take this opportunity to share a presentation I've put together for council and for the public. and just to preface this discussion, I'm actually really pleased that council is taking the opportunity to receive this information and consider the information. It's something that I think comes with a lot of misperceptions. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about how the property tax ratio works, how a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 or any of the other distribution ratios that are applied to the different classes of property on Bowen Island. So personally, I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to address the committee of the whole and share this information with you at this time. Just to speak quickly to Mr. Cormier's comments, at this point, I'm not making any recommendation to council. I'm strictly putting forth information through this committee of the whole meeting. And I will take my direction from council. So there is no preference or recommendation in my report that council take a position one way or the other. And what I am passionate about is that you have this opportunity to consider the information and learn about how it works and consider the impacts to the different property classes on Bowen Island. So I'll just take a moment here, get my screen set up. Okay. Beginning. There we go. Okay, so today's meeting, presenting information to the Committee of the Whole regarding the property tax distribution ratio. In order to really understand how the property tax distribution ratio works and how it impacts different classes of property owners, I'd like to just start from the beginning and give you a quick overview of how property tax rates are set in municipalities. I
can still see your presentation.
Oh, okay. There we go. Okay, thank you. It's blinking. Yeah. The property tax rate, it's called the mill rate. The reason for that, it comes from the Latin word mille, means 1,000. So the property tax rate, it's expressed as a rate per $1,000 of assessed value. And in 2022, the property tax rate was 1.878412 per $1,000 of assessed value. Where does that put us among other Metro Vancouver residential mill rates? Well, last year put us right in the middle. There were probably half of the Metro Vancouver properties had a higher mill rate, half of them had a lower mill rate. It doesn't really provide much information where we're at in consideration of other municipalities because it's all very much based on how much overall property is in each of the municipalities and what that division is among business properties or not-for-profit properties, that sort of thing. When we're creating the financial plan, we build the financial plan sequentially. We look at those amounts of money that will need to be raised to pay for all of the operations, for all of the capital expenditures, for all of our contributions to reserves and to look after our debt servicing requirements. Then we take our known sources of revenues. We know that we have user rates and fees. We know that we'll have withdrawals from reserve funds to help fund capital things. We know that we'll have grant funding. And lastly, we come up with that figure that needs to fill the gap. It needs to cover off all of the expected outflows or spending that is anticipated over the course of the year. And in 2023, the budget is estimated to be just over 7.4 million. So the property tax ratio is the last piece of the puzzle, and it determines how much of the property taxes are going to be assigned to each class of property. So if we change that property tax ratio, we're still collecting the same amount of money. It doesn't mean we're going to collect any more, but what it does is figure out how that property tax distribution is going to be broken up among the different classes of properties. So in Bowen Island, we have several different classes. We have residential class, light industry class, business class, utilities class. recreational, nonprofit, and farm class properties. These classes are assigned by BC Assessment. The municipality has absolutely no input into that process. It's completely independent from the municipality. BC Assessment looks at how a property is used. They may consider what the municipal zoning is on a particular property, but it is certainly not the defining factor that they use in making a decision about the correct classification for a property. It really comes down to how that property is used. So the property tax rate, they're actually not set, they're derived. So once council establishes that ratio of how they're gonna slice up the property tax revenue pie, who's gonna pay what portion, and they multiply that against all of the different classes of properties, that number has to equal what the final approved amount in the property tax revenue budget, the budget line item in the approved 5-year financial plan. And presently, we have a property tax distribution ratio that was set from the very first council. It's never been changed. It's always had a 1-to-1 business to residential, a 1-to-1 recreational property to residential, and a 0.5-to-1 farm distribution rates to residential. Utilities have been established at 4.16 times the residential rate, and light industry properties have also been established at 4.16 times the residential rate. Incidentally, there is a second property tax distribution ratio that is used. It's not used for our own purposes, but this is how we apply all of the different taxation rates that are given to us from the other taxing authorities. So all of the school taxes or the police taxes or the BC assessment taxes, they all follow a provincially dictated provincial tax ratio. This is separate from the municipal tax ratio, but it could be used as a guideline for council to consider the appropriateness when setting their own tax rates in our municipality. So you can see here that from the provincial perspective, utilities are 3 times what a residence pays. Businesses are 2.4 to 5 times what a residence pays. And not-for-profit and farm both have been set at 1 time what a residence pays. We don't have that supportive housing classification of property on Bowen Island, and we don't have Class 7, the managed forest land property either. So what do other similar sized municipalities do with their business class properties? Here's a sample of other relatively small municipalities in BC with populations ranging from about 3,600 up to about 5,600. They really are quite diverse. They range from 1-to-1 here on Bowen Island, all the way up to 5.05 to 1 in Metchosin. In Metchosin, businesses pay property tax at a rate of over 5 times what the residential class properties pay. It appears that many of them are in the 2 to 2.5, 3 range, but it really is quite a variance. But all in all, these properties are found in smaller communities, ranging right around 5,000. Only Bowen Island and Anmore, another small municipality in the Lower Mainland, have this similar 1-to-1 residential to business ratio. And only these properties that I've identified here, and I believe there's 11 of them, only these 11 municipalities have a rate that is less than 2-to-1. Again, they tend to be smaller municipalities with most likely a smaller business proportion of their makeup of their property assessments. Using last year's property tax ratio and numbers, this is what the collections from the different classes of properties look like. So overall, the municipality collected almost $6.6 million from taxpayers. And of that, 6.4 million, or just over 97%, is collected from the residential class. Just over 1.8%, or 116,801, was collected from the business properties, and relatively small amounts were collected from the remaining property classes. So overall, Bowen Island is overwhelmingly a residential class community. Now, just for illustrative purposes, what this would look like if the business to residential ratio was changed from 1:1 to 1:2. What would happen in that case is that the amounts that would be collected from those business properties would almost double, from almost 116,000 to 229,000. So that is quite a significant impact to those business property owners. And the impact would be that the residential property class owners would have some property tax relief in an equal amount. So to look at it kind of on an average property value basis, if you owned a home worth about $1.5 million last year and you paid tax at the residential rate of 1.878, your municipal taxes would cost about $2,890. And if you owned a business property with similar value, just over $1.5 million, paying that 1:1 business tax rate, you too would pay about $2,890. Now, if that ratio was changed to a 1:2 ratio, the homeowners would have some relief. They would pay about $2,840, while the business class property owner would pay $5,680. So that's a change of about $50 of relief to the residential property owner, and an increase in taxes to the business owner of about $2,790. I want to take a moment just to talk about the utilities class of properties and the light industry class of properties. So light industry and utility properties are both charged at 4.16 times the residential rate. Now, I don't want to presume to speak for decisions of previous councils or discussions that were had 20 odd years ago, but I think it's fair to say that typically in most communities, light industry includes extraction activities and transportation components, which potentially could add to the cost of infrastructure or have additional environmental considerations and other impacts to communities. So typically you will see a higher rate on light industry properties. Other similar sized communities, the rate charged to the light industry classifications ranges from 1.9 in Osoyoos right up to 12.22 in Princeton. Again, these are all similar sized municipalities that have some degree of light industry component within their tax base. And there we are kind of right in the middle with 4.16. With regards to farm properties, again, potential thinking behind previous council's decisions could include that councils chose to encourage and promote the sustainability of farming in our small rural community, and decided to establish a favorable tax policy to ensure that that those activities are encouraged. Other communities, small similar sized communities, establish tax ratios farm to residential ranging anywhere from from 1 to 1, right up to 4.24 times in Gibson's, which is interesting because I was consider Gibson's to be quite similar to us. So it was interesting to see their farm class as high as 4.24 times the residential rate. What council should consider is the impact of the utilities to residential rate. So 4.16 times the residential rate is what utilities pay. So those are companies, BC Hydro, Shaw, TELUS, those sorts of companies. In total, the taxation collected from those properties were $14,862 last year. Now, council does have the option to change that ratio. And in the event it were increased from 4.16 to say 21 times, the amount that would be collected from those properties is quite significant, almost $60,000 more. This rate is regulated by provincial regulation. There is a requirement that councils establish a rate of taxation on utility properties that are no more than either the greater of 2.5 times the business rate or $40 per $1,000 of assessed value. So a mill rate no greater than 40. Effectively, this approach would shift almost $60,000 of taxation from the residential properties onto those utility-owned properties. Again, it's not creating any additional revenue, but it is providing some kind of relief to residential property owners and shifting that on to utility properties. What do other municipalities do with this one? Most of them have significantly higher rates established for the utilities. You can see there are several that do set the rate at $40 per $1,000 of value. And there are others that are probably using the 2.5 times their business rate to establish a higher rate. Regardless, there's only one municipality.
Question from Councillor Fett.
Oh, yeah.
Just because I can't see it very well and I didn't see this in the report, can you tell me what the highest and lowest are there?
Yes. So the lowest, there's only one lower than Bowen, and that's a Soyuz, who is set it at 3.5. And the highest I'm looking at is Oliver, that has set it at 21.93 times the residential rate. Yes. So what should our municipality do? I believe that ratios need to be considered within the context of our own municipality, what the impacts to the property owners and the different classes of properties within our own municipality would be. I believe they should be set with a long-term planning horizon in mind that's going to create stability and predictability for potential investment, outside off-island investment. It can be a really significant economic driver for many communities, and in order to help shape the long-term vision of our community, I believe that these property tax ratios should be established and not change frequently, or certainly not change in significant amounts from year to year. Any changes that you're going to do should usually be a phased approach to ensure that those property owners have the opportunity, the chance to prepare and plan accordingly. So the property tax distribution ratio is embedded in the 5-year financial plan bylaw. The community charter requires that the bylaw separately set out the distribution ratios between the property classes. And the committee of the whole should consider the information received and provide a recommendation to council. The options before you today are that the committee of the whole should recommend no changes to the property tax distribution ratio, or the committee of the whole should recommend to council that the CFO be directed to bring back options for council consideration for changes to the property tax distribution ratio. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Wesson. Comments, questions from council? Council Fast?
Sure, I'll lead off. Thank you for this. It's great to get a good overall picture and so we can talk about it. And maybe we'll make changes, maybe we won't, but I had a couple of thoughts looking through my notes from previous years. Can everybody hear me okay? I can take this mask off if you. Are you okay, Tim? Yeah, okay. I'm looking at the front page of the undercurrent from back in May last year when both sides of the road were having work done on them. One side, we added the multi-use pathway through the cove, and the other side, we were replacing storm drains. Disruptive, no doubt, for businesses in the cove, but the municipality has been making some investments down there. And so I'm just going to ask these questions. And we did pave it about 6 years ago, we paved the road. We've charged, the previous council chose to charge the some of the Snug Cove sewer repairs island-wide. So some taxpayers are sharing, taxpayers island-wide are sharing some of the costs. And I understand businesses, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but businesses just pay for one hookup, even though they might use a lot of water. So I'm wondering, maybe it's not the best question to ask first, but are taxpayers on Bowen subsidizing business in the Cove? And can you tell me a little more about the hookup and water and utility rates? Because I know there's other costs that businesses have to pay. So I just think the question should be, I'd like to know what they think.
The first point that I'll bring up is how we deliver water and sewer services. They're all delivered through local service areas. So typically the only people or property owners that share in those costs are those property owners that directly receive those services. So apart from the decision made by council last year to use reserve funding to help pay for the Snug Cove sewer upgrade, all of the other direct operating day-to-day costs of using water and sewer are charged on consumption-based rates within Cove Bay or Snug Cove sewer. So those costs are not being shared island-wide by remaining taxpayers. They are being shared equitably among the property owners that are connected to that service. And because it is all done based on volumetric meter readings, there is I believe, an equitable distribution of the cost for those services paid for based on consumption.
Great.
You mentioned something about hookups, hookup fees.
Yeah.
So all of those businesses that have been part and included within that local service area have paid the fee that was established by the bylaw for that governs, the establishment of fees for each of those local service areas. They would have paid those fees at that time. Where we haven't until quite recently, in the past couple of years, there was a standard hookup fee for whether it be a business or whatever it was. What has happened in recent years, within the last 3 or 4 years, is a policy has been established to try to capture the additional development. So whereas one fee would have typically been the cost to connect a private home, now there's a utility development policy that states if you take this land from whatever it was originally zoned for, you increase the zoning on that, you will be charged a fee based on your incremental zoning to connect it to the local service area. So there has been a utilities development policy that's been in place, I believe since about 2017 and was amended in 2020 or 2021 in an attempt to capture those additional costs that should be attributed to a business property or any other multifamily residential property that comes with additional density.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have more questions, but I'm happy to let somebody else take a turn. Okay. I'm interested in commercial activity that's outside the cove, and maybe this is a question for BC assessment. But I'm wondering if with what we know about how many short-term vacation rentals and different kinds of business licenses we've got out there for short-term vacation rental, revenue was up to about $1 million in 2019. And I realize that COVID brought it down. I'm looking at the business license year-end report of 2021 that we saw around this time last year. And I'm wondering, I gather, maybe you can confirm for me that an Airbnb business, for example, besides our business fee, would also pay PST, provincial sales tax, and federal income tax, I guess. But they don't pay this municipal regional district tax currently. Is that correct?
No, it hasn't been implemented here on King Island.
All right.
We had a failed attempt to implement it a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I remember, and I was just making sure. I don't remember the rules about doing that, but that's something that the business, I'm just interested in the commercial activity that's outside the cove. And are there very many, are there many examples of businesses that are assessed as businesses by BC assessment that are outside the cove?
Any of those short-term rentals are going to retain their residential status. So making any changes to the property tax distribution ratio is not going to impact those businesses whatsoever.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's why I'm asking about the municipal regional district tax, okay?
There are a handful of businesses outside of the cove that do have business classification.
Burning.
Yep, they actually may be classed as light industrial. Not sure.
Yeah.
A few, just a handful.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to confirm that because it was also, the conversation and the letters were also cove based of what people's concerns were. Okay, and then, you know, I'm just, I know how hard it is for businesses in the cove to make it down there. I've known people who've had businesses down there, and I gather from what I heard from Bowen Tourism that the effort to put more visitation and visitation into the shoulder seasons hasn't worked as well as they would have liked. So and I know COVID is hitting hard, and I feel for the people that took out those loans. Although it was great that they had them to take out, the ones from the federal government. Anyway, so I'm not pushing one way or the other. I just had some questions. I've got one more, unless somebody else has one. Okay.
Still have the floor.
With farming, is that the same as farm tax status, where a farm can have to make a certain amount of revenue?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, they have to demonstrate sales of product grown on the site
Yeah.
of a certain threshold, yeah,
Yeah, okay, that's how they get them, and that's through this assessment.
correct.
Oh, thank you. Okay, good, thanks, that's my answers. I'm not,
Thank you, Councilor Fast. Any other questions or comments from councillors? Councilor Morse?
I think Kristen's report answered all my questions, and I'm quite happy to leave the business residential ratio at 1-to-1.
Since we're in a committee meeting, I'll just ask a general question also as a newer resident of the island and seeing some of those comparisons to other municipalities. I'm curious over the years, because we hear out in the community that, we are a tourist-driven community and that there's lots of visitation to the island. And then we know that the primary impacts of that are in the Cove. And that most of our businesses are in the Cove. What's been the discussion around, the general trajectory of the discussion around, and maybe not necessarily from a tax revenue place, but having those businesses that are benefiting from tourism, helping to offset those impacts? Has that been discussed around council? What's been the thread of that over the years?
I don't think we've discussed it around council,
Okay.
but having been involved in the Chamber of Commerce and the Tourism Board and all that stuff, the money they make off the tourists in the summer enables them to keep open so we can eat there in the winter, shop in the winter and all that stuff.
Okay.
So it's to benefit of us.
Councilor Fast?
yeah, I mean, I've been, for the past 4 years, traveling to Hornby and to Denman Islands as well. And each of them has one grocery store. And it's not only, and I've heard, and some of the trustees, one of them ran a grocery store on Gabriel as well. Galliano. And it's not only the prices of food have gone up, which makes it hard for them to make their margins or whatever the language is, but they have a hard time getting staff. Sound familiar? And a lot of their housing that workers on those islands, just like here, the rents have increased or have disappeared and people are having to commute and it's hard for them to keep the grocery stores open. And that's not even restaurants, that's just food. Yeah. So I'm for people who may have lifestyles where they don't go out to dinner and just have a more modest income or way of life. Still challenging times. So I'm happy to leave it at 1-to-1 for now, but I would like to look at the. I do think we've got sort of roads that are getting a lot of wear and tear from people visiting, and our island-based businesses, home-based businesses approach means there's more people going out to bed and breakfast and things like that in vehicles. I remember a long time ago when bed and breakfast owners used to pick up their guests at the ferry, some of them, and I don't know how much that happens now. Maybe it does happen, but I think we've got old style sort of artisan roads that need special care and treatment, and they're expensive to repair and it's wear and tear. And I that's why I'm interested partly in looking at the municipal and regional district tax, but I also knowing that, I think our policy now is to shuttle that all into the affordable housing fund, if we ever get any of that kind of tax. And maybe now's not the time to go into the details of short-term vacation rentals and all that kind of thing. But the world is changing. However, we still need to buy groceries, and so and we need our Bowen businesses and Bowen jobs, and that's in the official community plan as well, that there should be a local economy.
And that's a helpful context. I think part of what I'm processing. We had an event yesterday with Tourism Bowen Island that was well attended by a number of community leaders, and some of the vision and pieces that are coming out of that. By no means, I guess since we're on YouTube, by no means is that organization speaking about bringing hordes of new people to the island. It's the conversation really centered around what regenerative tourism for the island could look like. But even at that, a lot of that vision will have costs. It will still have impact in the cove. We know that there is work that we need to do down in the cove, and we can reorganize and developing down there. So I think there is, at some point, going to be room for a conversation as to, in terms of economic development, in terms of impacts on the cove, impacts on the rest of the island, and impacts on infrastructure. Where do these different segments of our community need to be contributing? Because I'm supportive of implementing the MRDT. But then if we're going to tax residential guest accommodations and residential providers, that discussion also needs to come around the business table. I would be supportive of looking at changes to the utilities rate in particular. I think that, would be an indication, maybe somewhere where we could pick up some extra dollars, given that we're looking at a double-digit tax increase on residential properties anyways this year, adding significantly to the business. And then if residential goes up, it'll also get taxed. They'll be subject to that as well, because it'll be if residential goes up double digits, and that's considered our one, then any changes that we make to the business would be in addition to that increase. We've seen the CFO nodding, so my basic arithmetic seems to add up. So that's where I would go. I would look for a recommendation to have alternatives for the utilities and maybe some of those other sectors, while keeping businesses the same for now, and some of those larger conversations are.
I also was wondering about utilities, and so I think I would support at least getting some more information on that. One of the things I started to think about was if we, well, first of all, utilities is just privately owned utilities. Is that right? Doesn't include.
Producing the utilities are BC Hydro, Shaw, TELUS, other small corporations that own rights to cell tower leases, things like that.
So I'm thinking, since everybody on the island uses these utilities, if we did provide some relief to residential by raising the utilities, those utility companies are just going to turn around and raise their rates to cover it. And I don't know if we're going to be any farther ahead, but I'd be interested in what your thoughts are on that.
I don't know if utility companies set their rates on a community by community basis. I think they're regulated, and I know BC Hydro doesn't, certainly. But looking back at what other communities do with utility rates, it seems to me that there is an opportunity there to increase. Again, it could be a phased increase. It doesn't have to be all at once, but I do believe that there is an opportunity there to raise on utilities a little bit at least.
Councillor Jurgensen.
Thank you. I am just struggling here a little bit with the math. I see that, residential to business 1-to-1. That makes sense. But I don't understand if there's a provincial restriction on the utilities being only 2.5 times greater than the business class, how we have 4.16. Shouldn't 2.5 times 1 be just 2.5?
No, it's the greater of 2.5 or $40 per $1,000 of value. So there's a two-tier test on that.
The 4.16 falls under the 40 per mil. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
That's right.
Any other questions or comments before we look for a recommendation back? Councillor Fast.
Yeah, I've got the utility sheet here from Kristen the CFO if anybody wants to look at it, but it's surprising how high some of these rates are, and yet they don't add up to that many dollars. However, I do think it's one way right now when groceries and cost of living is high and we're looking at a big tax increase that we could do this, ask staff to look at it this year. So, you know, the second recommendation there, asking the CFO to look at alternative options for utilities, I would support that.
Okay. It
You ready for a
seems
motion?
like we've exhausted discussion, unless Councillor Jurgensen, is your hand still up, or do you have something new?
I did have one more question, sorry, and it's
Oh, no
maybe
problem at all.
but just to understand utilities, I understand BC Hydro, Shaw, Telus. I don't understand how smaller corporations such as the Cowan Point Utility Company might fit into that. Are they classed as utility as well?
No, they are exempt. They have a statutory exemption under the Community Charter and the Local Government Act. So Cowan Point Utility, all of those small water systems they don't pay taxes on Bowen Island.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
That was a fantastic question, Councillor Jurgensen. I'll look to Councillor Fast.
Sure, well, I'll make the motion if people like. I move that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council consider changes to the current property tax distribution ratio by directing the Chief Financial Officer to bring forward alternative options for the utility rate.
Seconded by Councillor Wake. Any discussion on motion to recommend? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Oh, Councillor Jurgensen.
All right. Question, just to be clear that this would not change the business tax, the residential to business or any other class, and strictly be looking at changes to the utility.
That's how I understand the motion. Look to our CFO if that's.
That's how I understand the motion as well.
Ask Sophie to reread that.
Thank you.
So what I have here is that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council consider changes to the current property tax distribution ratio by directing the Chief Financial Officer to bring forward alternative options for the utility distribution ratio.
Only?
I didn't say only.
I know you didn't. I just wanted to clarify that we were only considering. I guess if that's clear, then I'm fine.
I don't know how to raise my hand.
Okay, Councillor Saunders, go ahead.
Thank you. So based on that motion, does that mean we are not considering changes to the business tax ratio?
Yes, so it, from the interpretation of the chair as well as from the CFO, it's limiting it to the utility tax ratio.
All right, so that would mean we're not doing anything with the business tax ratio. We're just considering changes to utility. I'm just looking for, like, is one canceling out, like eliminating the other, or is that still on the table somewhere?
No, so the way that the motion reads, the direction of the CFO, so by directing the CFO to bring forward alternative options for the utility ratio.
Yeah.
Is fairly explicit.
Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you.
No problem. And I would let the conversation around the table serve to inform that motion for the staff here. Councilor Wake.
I'm just wondering if we should be a little more careful about public perception. And I don't know, I think maybe adding the word only at the end would clarify that, would answer John's question.
I'm fine with that. It's just what I said originally, but that would be a good idea for clarification, especially if people are concerned and might be looking for problems.
Councilor Jurgensen.
Propose that we add to the end of it, instead of the word only, and leave other something to the effect of and leave other tax ratios, or have that
As is?
somewhere. There's
So by
yeah, the Councillor Wake's, I was thinking along the same lines as Councillor Wake, public perception here is important.
Let's see if we bring forward. Like you maybe wordsmithing over there, corporate officer?
By directing the chief financial officer to bring forward alternative options for the utility distribution ratio and leave other classifications unchanged.
Very good.
Okay. So the amendment, and it seems like the general support, so we'll do this by unanimous consent. If there's appetite for it, I'll just read out that second
But you're added.
phrase that was added. By directing the chief financial officer to bring forward alternative options for the utility distribution ratio and leave other classifications unchanged. Any objections to that amendment? Seeing none, the amendment carries. So we are back to the main motion. Any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
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 All opposed, raise your hand, say nay. Carries unanimously. Moving on to item 5, as we didn't receive them in the consent agenda by unanimous consent. Unless there's any objection, I'll look to receive the information items in 5.1. See no objections, that carries. And item 6, adjournment. Move to adjourn. Well, Councillor Morse was first. Councillor Saunders seconded. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
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 Carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, Councillor Jurgensen, Councillor Saunders, for joining us online. Thank you for those who joined us on the live stream.